Hello and welcome to
Hello.
another edition of Thinking Like a Lawyer. I'm Joe Patrice. I'm joined, as usual, by Kathryn Rubino and Chris Williams. We're all editors at Above the Law, and we're talking about legal stories of the past week, giving a quick rundown of the exciting stuff going on out there. Before we do that, as usual, we, have a little bit of a chat about unrelated things that's going on with our lives.
Yeah, just completely,
Which we call small talk, the segment of the show where we
Do
talk
I just
about other
walk
things.
into these like a buzzsaw? I'm like a fucking cartoon character over here who doesn't see that the thing is about to be pulled out from underneath me.
You weren't aware that's the entire stick. It's been that way for a while now.
No, I mean, I thought that one, he either was getting old and couldn't remember the word small talk, which I was kind of hopeful. And I thought that might prolong the, don't look at me like that, Joe. You are in fact old. Oldest of us for sure.
So
I
you
woke up this morning and chose violence.
That was what the words I was about to say,
I know,
actually.
you're
Oh, got you,
very
got you.
predictable.
Yeah. Well, old Joes is that how it goes? Can't
Yeah.
teach
Something
old
like
Joe a
that.
new trick. I forget.
So yeah, we're here. Obviously, it's been a very eventful several days, and not necessarily a legal story, but in the mainstream news. Though there are legal angles to it, we're trying to keep on top of any law firms that do work for the Russian government and what they're doing about it. So far, at least, Sidley Venable and Baker McKenzie apparently have all dropped their Russian government clients. So we'll see. Obviously, there's many more that do work there, but we're keeping an eye on that. That's not really one of the stories we were talking about, but that's we just wanted to acknowledge that we do understand, even though this show's not going to talk about that subject much. We
There
do
is in fact
understand
a
it's
war
happening.
going on. Yeah, I mean, a good portion of my weekend was definitely spent in front of cable news in a way that I'm not sure I have been since 2001.
I don't know about that. Elections, I feel
guess,
like
I
that's
guess.
about the only time I ever turn on cable news.
But I feel like the elections is more like a discrete amount of time. There's not like it's midnight, I don't know, kind of let me turn it on, let me see what's going on.
Did you not watch the 2020 election?
Yeah, but we actually knew the answer before then.
Right. Well, it took like 5 days, but I hear you.
Yeah, but we were pretty sure.
We had to turn Steve into a folk hero.
Yeah, Steve Kornacki of MSNBC,
Draped
sure.
Draped in khaki.
Gap khakis, listen, they're classics for a reason.
But
Yeah.
All
So what did you do this weekend, Chris?
Fuck this weekend. About 15, 20 minutes ago, I just got a bunch of jackets.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah,
I
and
got
was-
one too today.
Yeah, and I was so for people who don't know what's going on, which is basically everybody listening right now, including my mom when she does listen to this. Hi, Mom. So Joe, in his infinite grace, told me that there was a website that was selling very nice jackets at super affordable prices because they were going out of business.
Yep.
And I saw this one jacket that was like $27 and it retailed like $150 or so. And I was like, this is probably made with cardboard. And then Joe's like, no, I have one. This is damn near.
They're decent jackets. Yeah. No,
And I'm
I
about
actually.
This
Yeah,
This
you're
is not a
unboxing- it's an
sponsored portion of
unboxing.
our, but
Yeah,
I mean,
because
it
they're
can't-
out of business.
It can't be they're out
Yeah.
of business.
This is not sponsored by them because they may not exist anymore. And my arm fits through.
Good.
Step one.
Always first.
Oh, game over. Yeah, this is nice.
It
This
is.
nice.
Now,
Oh,
we can't show up in public both wearing the same jacket, but
yeah, we can't. I don't know what you're wearing, but I'm wearing this. I am bagging somebody's grandmother in this jacket. I'm going to
is.
get those AARP benefits. It is happening. Yo, this is nice.
It is and they were super cut.
And the
right.
pockets. They have they have pockets. Two. Oh wait, this is a fake one. But hey, say love it. You can't have everything. No, maybe
Is
maybe
it
I
just
just have to,
tax
like, open it?
closed?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
might need to open it. Yeah. Anyway,
yeah, we'll see. But yeah, so I'm
So
on
you
a-
got some clothes.
yes. Nothing helps soothe the the existential angst and worry about sanctions like a little bit of consumerism. So
Absolutely. I've definitely spent a fair amount of this weekend shopping as well. How about you, Joe? What did you get into?
I was judging a debate tournament, so
How'd your teams do?
they won.
Nice.
So yeah,
Nice. I mean, I knew the answer to that question. That
Right,
was kind of
'cause you were also there.
ooh, not more conspicuous consumerism. I love it.
Do
Love
not
to
mind
see
me.
it.
Do not mind me. This is one of the moments where I'm glad that the podcast is not being recorded because there's.
I mean, we are, in fact.
Damn, well, don't make it weird. Don't remind me. Oh, this one is burgundy. Oh, streets are not ready. They are not ready.
Nice.
Yes.
So, since you mentioned that I was judging a debate tournament, I think that's a very good transition.
I was trying. I'm here for you.
Okay, you're done.
You're not here for me, but I'm here for you. Because I was trying to prompt a seamless transition here.
Right. So,
but instead, I got interrupted rudely by your soundboard.
Mm-hmm. So the transition,
so cold.
The transition, of course, is that we now have a nominee for the current, the soon-to-be vacant Supreme Court seat. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will be going through a confirmation process, which one assumes she would clear, given that she was, went through the same thing less than a year ago for her.
I mean, that is bold, but I certainly agree. I certainly hope that that's true. But
yes.
One thing that the Republicans have taught me over the last 7 or 8 years is there's no dumb argument that they won't make. So.
It's true. There was an attempt to block her before that failed, and not much has really changed. So one assumes she gets through. The reason this is a transition, of course, is that she was a star on her speech and debate team at Miami Palmetto, and there was
an article this weekend. New York Times wrote an article how a high school debate team shaped Ketanji Brown Jackson, and it includes a quote that she had from 2017 talking about the debate team that that was an experience that I can say without hesitation was the one activity that best prepared me for future success in law and life.
Yep.
And all of your hosts are actually debate team alumni. So it seems like potential Supreme Court justices, they're just like us.
Yeah. I
Shouts out to
that's
Rutgers.
the takeaway.
Yep. RU debate, uniting the crowns forever and always.
Then, and I went to the University of Oregon, who...
I debated for NYU.
And there you go. Yeah. So...
NY who? No.
Anyway. So it was very interesting. Judge Jackson, of course, actually won high school nationals in oratory, which is persuasive speaking. Yeah, I actually talked with David Marcus, who's also hosts a podcast about criminal defense work. Pretty prominent criminal defense lawyer in Miami. He actually was on. He traveled with Judge Jackson. He was
so he was on the same circuit in high school.
He was on the same circuit in Miami, and so chatted with him a little bit about his memories of her. And yeah, I don't really have much more to say about it on that front. On the more substantive front, we can transition to that. If we can transition to that, this is obviously the candidate that I think we all thought was the front runner all along. There was some noise about Judge Childs, driven largely by South Carolina.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott basically made noise that they would support Judge Childs, given that Judge Childs is from South Carolina, because some things are thicker than partisanship, and that
states' rights.
Yeah, so that ultimately, I mean, South Carolina getting way into states' rights has never gone south on us at all. But yeah, no, so they made that noise. There was some suggestion that might be what happened, but no, Judge Jackson obviously ended up being the front runner like we thought all along, which makes sense. Her nomination to the DC Circuit was largely conducted as a preview for this.
Sure, but I do think that, going back to the earlier point about how smooth this will be, ? Hopefully it is smooth, and I am just being overly nervous for no reason. I certainly hope that is what happens. But Lindsey Graham, in particular, he voted for Judge Jackson in the to be on the DC Circuit, but went very flame on this weekend, saying how the nomination of Judge Jackson was a point for the far left, and how Biden has given up centrist and all the kind of terrible whatevers that you can imagine. But he at least seems to be signaling, well, probably two things. One, that he's really pissed that it wasn't Childs. One. Two, that you can't take for granted that all of the folks who voted for Judge Jackson to be on the DC Circuit will necessarily support her to be Justice Jackson. So I think that definitely opens up some more stuff. But one of the other interesting thing was that despite sort of this fiery rhetoric, there doesn't appear to be a ton of cases or decisions or articles that Judge Jackson has written that the right seems to be calling attention to as problematic. I think that they're just basically saying it's a Black woman, she must be far left, as opposed to actually doing any of the anything that says this case is a problem, this representation. It really is just about dog whistles at this point and not about actual substance, which is both not surprising but may also be effective.
You raise an important point that if somebody receives support and confirmation to a circuit court, that does not necessarily translate to getting to the Supreme Court. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that, circuit courts are courts and the Supreme Court is not, despite the name. It is, it's not bound by anything, which, takes away most of the courtiness of it.
Well,
putting somebody on a circuit.
Some district courts don't think that they're bound by anything.
That's true. We did talk recently about a district court that didn't think it was bound by anything, but they're supposed to be. And that does raise different calculus when you're deciding who does and doesn't get to be on there. That said, this was a very recent, with the same group of senators process. It was an effort where all of the same opposition research had been marshaled and proved insufficient. That does suggest that this will be a little bit smoother of a path. And I think that was a large part of why she was always, in my mind, a front runner. You had somebody who had already gone through the crucible, basically, recently, and come out the other side with no scrapes. That makes it easier. So we're going to see this process unfold, preferably relatively quickly before midterms. And we will have somebody prepared to take that seat when Justice Breyer steps down after the term ends in, June, July, depending on how much they've oversubscribed with cases.
Which sounds like they may have, but we shall see.
So, any other thoughts on our new Supreme Court nominee? Nope. All right. Yeah.
If you're looking for a clerk, let me know.
There you go.
I have a blue book, both virtual and physical. I'm not good at it, but I'm willing to learn. I'm a big fan of M dashes.
Everyone is.
I like my commas Oxforded. You feel me? Let me know.
I actually read a thing. I can't know who wrote it. Somebody wrote a guide to good legal writing where one whole section was just, look, the M dash is amazing.
It's so good.
It was just like, look,
so good.
I understand there are some pedantic people who are like, that shouldn't be that. That should be a semicolon. But the author was like, no, use M dashes. They're amazing. Look, I completely agree.
This podcast is brought to you by the M dash.
Yes. I'm so M dash. I have memorized Alt 0151 so that I can just put the M dash into WordPress when I write. Do I know the only other numbers I remember like that are my mom's cell phone? That's it. My mom's cell phone, M dash.
I think if you put two N dashes in the back end, it appears on the site as an M dash.
Yeah, if you do it in the text mode in WordPress as two little dashes, it'll come up as an M dash.
Now, see, everyone's hearing a little bit of the inside baseball of how this whole thing works. So what are we going to do now? Are we... Oh, phone's ringing.
Are you serious?
Did
you increase the soundboard so you can do a smoother transition to our ads?
I did this last week too. Do you not remember?
I blacked out.
Okay.
You must have been able to do this because you had more free time.
Excellent point. I had free time because I had folks able to field these calls and handle the intake and all the stuff that you need receptionists to do. So let's hear from Posh.
As a lawyer, ever wish you could be in two places at once? You could take a call when you're in court, capture a lead during a meeting. That's where Posh comes in. We're live virtual receptionists who answer and transfer your calls so you never miss an opportunity. And the Posh app lets you control when your receptionist steps in. So if you can't answer, Posh can. And if you've got it, Posh is just a tap away. With Posh, you can save as much as 40% off your current service provider's rates. Start your free trial today at posh.com.
All right, we're back.
Less smooth.
What do you mean? Not only was that smooth, I got an assist from Chris on it too.
Mine was
yeah.
velvet.
Yeah.
Come on.
I just think that Kathryn's
Judge Jackson, if you're listening,
Yeah,
those transitions could be yours too.
So I guess let's talk about Russia a little bit. I know we previewed this as part of small talk, and we aren't going back. We aren't going back to small. Is that the sound effect you wanted to have as opposed to a trumpet?
The trumpet is particularly irritating, but
I wouldn't be opposed to like a Barry White small talk. Just once for the culture. Like,
yeah, no, I like that.
I think people should definitely write into us. It's tips@abovethelaw.com, subject line, small talk, and let us know what sound effect you prefer for small talk. We can get some like audience participation here. Small talk.
Yeah, so transitioning, we did preview a little bit that there's, obviously there's a war on, and there are efforts globally to kind of isolate the Putin regime. But big law firms do a lot of work for that regime. And what are they doing about it? And some firms, we've said, have already announced that they're, pulling away. Others have been silent. Still others, I note there are a couple of firms, Freshfields and White & Case in particular, who do work for some of the sanctioned Russian banks. However, they are doing litigation work in the middle of active ongoing cases, which for a variety of professional responsibility reasons.
Can't just drop those like a hot potato.
Yeah, you probably locks them in. And so if people want to begin a process of making noise and trying to pressure firms to drop these clients, remember that at least some of these firms may be under professional obligations that prevent them from acting quickly.
Sure.
But I want to take this time to kind of talk about the morality of it. Now, we've talked about this in other contexts before, but like lawyers like the phrase like everyone deserves a lawyer, but that's a little bit naive. Law firms have obligations as businesses. They are brands. They have to worry about that. They have other clients who don't want to be attached to some of this work. I mean, I'm pretty confident the board of directors of Disney does not want their name casually mentioned in the same breath as war criminals. So these are considerations.
We don't talk about Bruno.
Yeah, we don't talk about Vlad. These are concerns that law firms need to take into account. And I know there is this, I already used the word naive, but there's this mythos of our profession. We don't, everyone deserves a lawyer and we take on everything. And that's just not how reality plays out.
Right.
You have other concerns and need to embrace that sometimes part of good client service is recognizing that you can't have every client.
Yeah, and I think that this a similar issue or the same issue, but just in a different context, came up, in the wake of the January 6th coup attempt, right? When some big law firms were very much implicated, whether clients or signed some documents, trying to contest the 2020 election. And who your clients are matter when you are a global business. There's also, I think, a vast difference between representing, that kind of mythology of everyone deserves a lawyer when you're talking about someone who is facing jail time in a personal situation, right? Versus these very savvy, large businesses. I don't think that, and they're also civil cases for the most part, right? They're not criminal cases. So I think there's also a different imperative about whether or not people actually require or how much representation or whether or not you need to be doing the representing. And so I think that is also a little bit different. But, we said it, in the wake of January 6th. And I think it's also true now that who your clients are matter. They matter to your brand. And they also, means it matters for recruitment. That's the other part that's very, very true, especially right now. Big law is, I've said it a million times in the last year and a half, we're in the middle of a white hot lateral market, right? And that means that little things can sometimes make the difference. If you're, trying to hire more folks and the difference between you and a competitor is, oh, I don't have to worry about this kind of sticky Russia representation stuff. Why wouldn't that be a deal breaker? Why wouldn't that be the difference maker when folks are looking at stuff? We're seeing increasingly compensation is the same. A lot of benefits are kind of leveling out here. When you talk about things like these kind of nebulous ideas, like what is a firm culture, the clients and the kind of work you do help to create that.
There's so many levels of this, and we've had I personally know when Ellie and I were hosting this show, we devoted an entire episode to this question of where do you draw the line, and to what extent is your professional obligation to give everyone a zealous defense run afoul of your business obligation to worry about your other clients. And there are criminal defense lawyers who will take on everybody, but part of why they do that is their job is to help people who are rightly, wrongly, fairly, unfairly social pariahs. Mm-hmm. And so they do want to have those clients because that is a service to the rest of their clients to show that they are willing to take on that work and able to help those folks. That is not the same thing as somebody who's representing, I keep bringing up Disney, but I mean, that's a brand that, has to worry about that sort of stuff. And then there's questions of, to what extent are you representing somebody? We talked about this a lot with the Hogan Lovells situation, where at the Supreme Court, they were working with Nestle in a child slavery discussion. But the specific question that was being litigated was a very hyper-technical one about statutes and what they mean. Does the fact that the circumstances surrounding it have kind of an unsavory cloud change the motivations and the pressures? Yeah. It's a very interesting question, and it's one that I feel lawyers often blow off, and because they're so in love with this image of themselves as these crusaders, but it's not how the real world works. And I think it's worth having that conversation and thinking about what do you do in these sorts of sticky situations.
And the other kind of side to the coin, I think, is some firms, Paul Weiss in particular, has started a bunch of pro bono work for Ukrainians. And I think that's sort of the, both in terms of a PR, but also in terms of the legal work that's being done. That's kind of the other side of the coin is, marshaling the resources of big law to help,
Yeah, not a surprising move. Paul Weiss has...
It's very on brand for them.
Historically, Paul Weiss did pro bono work during World War II for Jewish folks fleeing Germany. This is very much what this firm has done historically. Mm-hmm. There are a number of organizations that Chairman Brad Karp sent out an email last night to the firm identifying some organizations that they're giving donations to and offering pro bono legal services to help that are focused on refugee support. This is you're right, this is the other side of this, and something that more firms need to step up, because they have firms offer something valuable and they could be using it here.
Absolutely.
So I guess let's finish up on a story that did reasonably well last week, talking about the Virginia bar exam.
Okay.
The Virginia bar exam, for those of you who don't know, has a policy that you can only take it if you're dressed up.
Professional garb, right? So it's a suit
and ties for men to take a test. For women, pantsuits are allowed, which is nice because historically that wasn't true.
Progress.
There was a day where dresses were required for women taking the test, so we're moving on up there.
Ever forward. I mean, of all the instances in your life where one has to don a suit, I feel like taking the bar exam is the dumbest. Pretty easily, right? Court appearances, sure. Weddings, cool. Funerals, understandable. Taking a test, dumb.
Yeah, this is a policy that is so retrograde, and it's
It's also
So-
classist, right?
Yeah.
Like make sure you have a suit before you're even allowed to be a lawyer, right? So it assumes a lot of things about folks' ability to pay for things like that, and in a world where they can't actually work yet because they haven't passed the bar exam yet, which is, really dumb.
Yeah, and it's also just it reflects the way in which bar examiners and licensing doesn't understand the modern practice of law. As a litigator, sure, you will wear suits when you go to court. There are wide swaths of the legal profession that never, ever, ever find themselves doing that.
Yep.
There are tax lawyers that don't even leave their office, that have never seen a client, that just some rainmaking corporate partner flings work into their office like a bucket of fish heads, and nobody knows what happens in there, but
We have the answer.
work product comes out. There's no reason why everybody needs to dress up. It's just like weird.
It's retrograde and
cosplay.
classist.
Yeah,
sure.
It's a power play of these board examiners just being like, I can make you treat me like I was a judge.
Also, given COVID, professional dress has been button-down shirt and basketball shorts.
Mhm.
So I feel like if somebody went there wearing that should count, because the last 2 years, that's been the case.
Law firms have been on business casual for years at this point.
Yep. I was told just make sure you have a suit in the back of your office door just in case.
Yeah, just in
Okay.
case.
Okay.
It's
Never got worn. It stayed there.
yeah. So if it were a better reflection on how the actual legal profession works, then at some point in the middle of day 2 of the exam, they should say, "All right, everybody, quickly put on your suit for the next question," and then you can get rid of it.
Then you can take it off.
That would be at least
More accurate.
At least track reality a little bit. Yeah, no, it's unfortunate that this still happens. Hopefully this will change, but it will only change if people out there run for leadership positions inside these organizations. Unfortunately,
That's something.
if there's nothing else, I think we can wrap this up.
Wrap it up, friend.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for listening. You should be subscribed to the show so you get new episodes when they come out. You should give reviews, stars, also write something. It helps more people hear it.
Move up the algorithm.
It's all about algorithms. You should check out Kathryn's show, The Jabot. I'm also a panelist on the Legal Tech Week Journalist Roundtable. You should check out the other shows by the Legal Talk Network. You should be reading Above the Law so you see these and other stories before you hear our recap of them on the show every week. You should follow us on social media. I'm at Joseph Patrice. She's at Kathryn1, the numeral 1. He's at Rights for Rent. You should be checking out our sponsor, Posh. And
if you're thinking of a thing in the comment to help with the algorithm, maybe you could put a sound effect we should add to the box.
oh, right. Yeah. Let us know. I'm always eager to get more sound effects. So let me know what would be fun.
I got
Kathrynn's
an email from a
chagrin.
listener who said that I was right about this, by the way. And
Oh,
that
yeah. You did get somebody who said you were, yeah.
Thank you. I read it. I appreciated it.
Fair enough.
And more people, I'm sure. The silent majority is with me.
Well, silent people don't speak up. We'll see you all next week.
All right. Bye, all.